Hi, this is Holly of Holly's Soapmaking. In this video, I'll show you how I make a coffee soap. I usually make this round soap using a simple in-the-pot swirl, but I thought it would be fun to try out a tool that I purchased from SUDS, so this will be a Kaleidoscope coffee soap. If you're interested in the recipe, you'll find it at the end of this video entered into a soap calculator, and all of the other details and information will be listed and linked in the description box below. Just as a quick safety reminder, soap making involves the use of sodium hydroxide or lye, which can burn your skin and permanently damage your eyes. So be sure to learn and follow lye safe handling procedures during the entire soap making process, even while cleaning up. For this soap, the coffee will replace all of the water required for my lye solution. So I started by making a regular pot of coffee as I normally would. I use 35 grams of coffee for every 500 grams of distilled water, but you can make the coffee any way you like. You just need enough for your recipe. Of course, if you end up a little short when it's time to make the lye, you can always add a little water to make up the difference. I prepared the coffee a few days in advance of actually making the soap, so I decided to freeze it to keep it fresh. Once it had completely cooled, I poured it into some ice trays, then put them in the freezer until I was ready to use it. My mold for this soap was just a regular size Pringles can. The Kaleidoscope or pull-through tool that I purchased from SUDS fits perfectly into the can. Belinda makes all kinds of tools for soap makers, so I'll be sure to list her website and Instagram page below. I actually posted a video a few years ago on a pull-through soap that I made for the Soap Challenge Club, where my idea came from watching Marie of MOUSSE on YouTube use a pickle strainer that she pulled through a round mold. I didn't have a pickle strainer, so I had to improvise. I'll link my video and Marie's below in case you'd like to see those. I always like to line the Pringles can with freezer paper to keep the soap from sticking and so that I can reuse the can again later. I don't worry about securing the paper inside the can, I just cut enough to cover it and let it unroll to fill the inside. I also line the lid that will function as the bottom of the mold, but I actually meant to wrap the bottom in plastic wrap and then put the lid over that. You'll see later that I had just a little bit of a leak. It wasn't anything major, but I believe the plastic wrap probably would have helped stop that. And it definitely would have been easier than worrying about cutting out this little piece of paper. To keep the soap centered as I'm pouring, I used a funnel that fit nicely in the top of the can. This is just a threaded bottle funnel that I found in my husband's workshop, but I'm sure any funnel will probably do, although I did like the wider opening. Since this was a Kaleidoscope soap, I wanted to use contrasting shades so the design would really stand out. My colorants were cocoa powder that I mixed with a little distilled water to make it easier to blend in later, activated charcoal blended with some sunflower oil, and titanium dioxide dissolved in warm water. Once the colorants were ready, I weighed out the coffee from my lye solution. I added the sodium hydroxide a little at a time and gently stirred. When you're making the lye, be sure to work in a well-ventilated area and never stand directly over the container or breathe any of the fumes. Since I was using a frozen liquid, the temperature stayed quite low and it reduced the amount of fumes. I don't always remember to freeze the liquid I'm using ahead of time, but I highly recommend it if you have the time, even if it's just distilled water. I continued to stir for a bit until I was sure all of the sodium hydroxide had completely dissolved. Then I set the lye aside and weighed out my oils and butters. I stopped blending once I reached an emulsion, then divided the soap into 4 equal parts. To create the black soap, I added 1 teaspoon of the charcoal oil to 1½ cups of soap. For the dark brown soap, I added 1 teaspoon of the hydrated cocoa powder to 1½ cups of soap. For the plain coffee-colored soap, I just blended it a bit more so it would be at the same consistency as the other colors. And finally, for the lighter colored soap, I added 1/2 teaspoon of the titanium dioxide to 1½ cups of soap. I wanted to pour the same amount of soap each time, so I counted to 4 or 5 with each pour and tried my best to keep it consistent. As you'll see in the cut, I didn't quite get each layer centered, but I was really happy with the result. I did oven process this soap so I could hopefully unmold it the next day. To keep the mold from tipping over in the oven, I placed it in one of my loaf molds and surrounded it with some wooden lids and a dish towel to keep it steady. I removed the soap from the oven the next morning, then unmolded and cut it that afternoon. I photographed it a few days later after the colors had lightened up a bit. Since this was a cold process soap, I made sure the type of lye was set to sodium hydroxide, or NaOH. My recipe oil weight was 800 grams. I normally use 700 grams for a Pringles can mold, but I wanted to create some extra little guest soaps, so I used a bit more for this batch. The lye concentration was set to 33%, which means my lye solution consisted of 33% sodium hydroxide and 67% coffee. I left the superfat at 5% and my fragrance usage rate was 20 grams per kilogram. This recipe does contain lard, so I'll be sure to include a second lard-free recipe that I really like following this one. Once you have everything entered, you just select to calculate the recipe, then to view or print it. SoapCalc gives you a really nice listing of your entire recipe, including the amount of sodium hydroxide required to saponify your oils. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found something useful here to help you in your soap making.